the International Faculty and Scholar Services office here, and I'd like to welcome you to our completing the Form 8843 presentation today. So this session is designed for persons who only need to file the federal Form 8843 to meet their tax year federal filing obligations. So who needs to file this form? Basically, if you are in F or J status and were present in the United States for at least one calendar day in 2023, then you need to file the Form 8843, at least the Form 8843. This also is required if you are a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes. If, however, you have become a resident alien for federal tax purposes, then you do not need to complete this Form 8843 anymore. Instead, you would file your tax return as any U.S. citizen or permanent resident would file. So this Form 8843 is only for non-resident aliens who are present at least one day in the calendar year of 2023. This also includes any F2 or J2 dependents that you may have. So they also do need to complete this form, or if you have children under the age of 13 or under the age of 14, you can fill out the Form 8843 for them. And you can submit all of your forms together in one envelope to the IRS. So let's look a little more at that distinction between resident alien and non-resident aliens. So those of you who are the former don't need to actually sit through this presentation. So basically, if you're a resident, you file like a U.S. citizen. If you're a non-resident, then you determine what forms you need to file. If you have any U.S. source income, then you will need to file the 1040-NR in addition to the 8843. If you have no U.S. source income, then you will only need to file the 8843. Now, determining your residency status. There are basically two tests for this. The first one is simple. If you have a green card, then you're a resident. The second one is called the substantial presence test. This is a little more complicated. It's basically a formula that identifies or counts up the number of days that you've been present in the United States for the tax year that you're currently looking to complete your forms for, as well as the previous tax years. So basically, if you meet the substantial presence test, you then have become a resident alien. If you do not meet it, then you are a non-resident alien. In order to meet the substantial presence test, you have to have spent at least 31 days of presence in the current tax year. What do I mean by current tax year? That's the year that's under question for completing your tax. So today it happens to be February of 2024, but the current tax year is 2023. So we're just looking at all of your activity between January 1st and December 31st of 2023. So if you were present for 31 days in 2023, then you've met the first requirement for meeting substantial presence test. However, there's an additional requirement, and that is having 183 days of presence during the prior 3-year period. So you would include all of the days present in 2023, then you count up the days present in 2022, and count up the days present in 2021. Understanding that for those days that you were present in 2022, you only count 1/3 of them. So if you were only here for 180 days, then you would only include 60 for your total of 2022. And then for tax year 2021, if you were only present for 180 days, you'd only count a sixth of those, so only 30 days. And then you would, but for tax year 2023, you count full days. So basically, you count all your days of 2023, and then you add in all your days of 2022, but 1/3 of them, and then you add in 1/6 of all of your days of 2021. And if you hit that 183-day mark, then you have met the substantial presence test. Now that, however, is for standard non-immigrants. F and J non-immigrants may qualify as exempt individuals. Exempt individuals does not mean exempt from paying taxes or exempt from filing your tax return. It means exempt from counting days of presence toward the substantial presence test. How does this work? So basically, if you are an F student or a J1 exchange visitor in a student category, then you are allowed to exempt or exclude days of presence for up to 5 years, calendar years. So in other words, if you arrived in the United States in F1 status in 2020, fall of 2020 for your degree program, then you're going to be able to exclude all days of presence in 2020, in 2022, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. You don't have to count days of presence until 2025. That's when you would actually start counting your days of presence. One additional factor to know about the exclusion for F and J students is that it's a lifetime total. So in other words, if you were here in an earlier program, say you did a bachelor's degree, and then you left, went back home, and then you're coming back for a PhD degree later, those earlier years that you were here as a bachelor's degree count towards those 5 years. Another very important point to note is that any amount of time present in a calendar year counts as a full calendar year. So if someone were to have arrived in the United States on December 21st, then that 10-day period from December 21st through December 31st actually uses up one of your years. Okay, so that was the student exemption. For scholars, it's quite a bit different. Scholars look back 6 years and identify whether they've been exempt individuals for at least 2 of those 6 years. So scholars can claim exempt individuals for 2 of the previous 6 years. If they've been here for 2 years, then in the 3rd year, they start counting. Now, the unusual thing about the scholars is that it's a 6-year look back period. And so eventually, the time you spent 5, 6, 7 years ago is going to fall off this look back period. And so that could then change your residency status. So for our scholars our J1 scholars who may have been here in previous periods of time, your situation can be much more complicated. And you can actually flip-flop from non-resident alien to resident alien. And then as those couple years drop off and you're still here in the United States, you could flip back to non-resident alien. So that can be very confusing for folks. Generally, we just suggest you look at your Glacier record. So those of you who are receiving payments from UC San Diego in 2023 should have a Glacier record. And you can access your Glacier record, and Glacier will tell you your residency status, whether you're a resident alien or a non-resident alien. So anyway, I've explained kind of the overall substantial presence test. Let's look at a couple other factors that play into this. The first is for our J1 exchange visitors, some of you may be student category, and others may be scholar category. It's the category on the DS 2019 that determines which of these exempt individual selections you make. So even though you may be a graduate student in a home institution, if you're over here at UC San Diego in a visiting graduate student appointment, we will have actually categorized you as a research scholar. So you would actually use the scholar classification. Similarly, an F1 OPT student who may be employed full-time, perhaps even teaching in a faculty position, if you're still in F1 status, that's a student category. So you would still be an F1 student and not a scholar. And just forgot to suggest to please hold your questions to the end of the presentation, and then at the end, I'll go through and answer them to the best of my ability. Okay. So here we have a couple examples. If you're an F1 student or J1 student and you first arrived in the US no earlier than January 1st, 2019, and had no prior presence in the US in F or J status, and have not changed status since your arrival, then you would be a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes for 2023. So basically, I hold up my hand and I count the years: 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. I'm still a non-resident alien as a student because I'm still able to exclude days of presence because I'm an exempt individual. In 2024, so in 2025, when we're completing tax returns for tax year 2024, an individual in this situation would actually have to start counting days of presence. And if they met that 183-day total in 2024, then they would need to file as a resident alien for federal tax purposes. J1 scholar, if you first arrived in the US in 2022, in 2023, you're still able to exclude days of presence, so you would be a non-resident alien. This is assuming that you had no prior presence in the United States in F or J status, and that you have not changed status as well. So you would be a non-resident alien as well for 2023, and you would change to resident alien for tax year 2024. And again, tax year runs January 1st to December 31st. If you had no days of presence throughout that year, then you don't actually have to be attending this workshop. And you don't have to file anything until next year. So if you're able to determine whether you're a resident alien or non-resident alien, those of you who are resident aliens for federal tax purposes, the rest of this session is not going to be helpful to you because it's going over the Form 8843, which is not something you need to submit. And instead, I would just encourage you to attend the federal and state tax workshops that are coming up in March for more resources and help in understanding your tax return filing obligations for the tax year. Now, what we'll be doing next is moving on to actually completing the form 8843. So the hyperlink at the top of the screen here is where you can actually download this form. You can print it out and fill it out and then send it in. So it's a very simple form. First of all, let me just say that right off the bat. It's a very simple form, and you only have to complete a few parts of the form. The heading and part one, everyone completes. Then our scholars will complete part two, and our students will complete part three. And then you would sign the signature block at the end. So that's it for the form. It's quite simple. We're going to go now part by part and look a little more closely. So here is the heading that everyone needs to complete. So basically, you leave the tax year blank because the default is January 1st to December 31st. And I don't think any of you would have any reason to claim any other date period. So leave that blank. And then you would insert your first name and initial and your last name. And I'm just giving my details here. And then for US taxpayer ID, if you have a social security number, then you would input it there. Or if you have an ITIN, you would input the ITIN there. If you have neither, that is okay. Just write none, and that's fine. And then you're going to insert your address in your home country or last country in which you were living prior to arriving in the US. Okay. If you're no longer living in the US, you would insert your current address here. This is the address in country of residence. And then, in the address in the United States, if you're currently in the United States, you would put your US address. If you are no longer living in the US, just leave this blank. So this is how the IRS would contact you if there is any need for them to contact you. So that's the heading. Now we're going to move to part one, the general information. Here they want to know the type of US visa. And as you're probably getting familiar with, sometimes visa and non-immigrant status, actually often visa and non-immigrant status is used interchangeably. I like to distinguish a visa stamp and a passport from your non-immigrant classification in which you were admitted to the United States. And basically, question 1A is asking for this non-immigrant status in which you were admitted to the United States using that particular visa stamp to gain admission. So basically, if you're an F1, F2, J1, J2, you would just indicate that status in the blank. And then you would enter the date that you entered the United States in that status. Question 1B is getting at the fact of, did you change your status? IRS would want to know if you've changed your status. So if that's the case, then you would indicate what your new status is and the date that that effective change of status was. So in this particular example, I haven't changed my status, so I'm just going to reiterate that yes, my current status is still J1. It remains J1. For question 2, of what country were you a citizen during the tax year? So this would be your country of citizenship or passport country. And then you would enter your passport number in the blank below. So again, pretty straightforward. Question 4A is getting at how many days you were present. So this is counting days for purposes of the substantial presence test. So you would actually literally count the days that you were present in the United States, and you would input them here. So in this particular example, I'm showing 0 days in 2021, 122 days in 2022, because I came on September 1st of 2022. And then 2023, 330. I happened to take a 35-day break. I went back to my home country. And so those are my days that I've spent in the United States for purposes of the substantial presence test. But then in 4B, they ask you to enter the number of days in 2023 you claim you can exclude for purposes of the substantial presence test. So this is getting back to your exempt individual status. So again, if you're an F or J student, you can exclude days of presence for up to 5 years, and the J scholar for 2 years. So if you're still an exempt individual in 2023, I can exclude all days of presence. So I will put all those days as excluded for purposes of the substantial presence test. So this is how then everyone here would be filling out this form, this part 1 of this form. Now let's look at part 2 for scholars. For teachers, enter the name, address, and telephone number of the academic institution where you taught in 2023. Taught is just a basic word that they're using, but basically this includes teachers and researchers, just anyone pursuing scholarly pursuits in a J1 classification, research scholar, professor, short-term scholar. So basically you're just putting the address of our institution. And I'm going to recommend that you put specifically our office's address. And then for item 6, actually put my name and my contact information. And the reason for this is because if IRS has a question, they will reach out to this particular contact. And I know about the form 8843, and your PIs, your departmental contacts will not know anything about the form 8843. So it's best for IRS to contact me. Have I ever been contacted in the last 12 years? No. So go ahead, fill in my information. And then for question 7, you're going to indicate in this period, the 6-year look-back period, what types of non-immigrant status, so not your visa stamp and your passport, because you could have multiple visa stamps, right? But they want to know the status that you were present in the United States in. So for me, in this particular example, I was only in the US in J1 status in 2022, and I leave the other years blank. If I were an F1 student who started in 2018, I'd be putting F1 in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. Although that doesn't pertain because this is a scholar section, not a student section. So then you've indicated how many of these look back years you were present in J status. And then you answer the question, were you exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of 2 of the preceding 6 calendar years? So this is getting at that exemption, the exempt individual status, and the substantial presence test. In this particular situation, I would say no, because I was only exempt for calendar year 2022. So I'm going to hit no. If we have scholars here who were present in 2021 and 2022, that's going to be an indicator that, whoa, you're probably a resident alien. Okay, now we'll go on to part 3 for the students. And similar to part 2, I would suggest that you put your institution address here, and particularly our office, and then my name as well, and my contact information there. And then you would do the same, entering the years that you had this status. And then similarly, the part will ask you whether you were exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student. And notice that they ask both teacher and student. So this gets at the point that some of you may have changed status from an F1 student to a J1 researcher. And that's very possible, or vice versa. And they want to know if that's the case, and you would actually enter your status in those years because it all counts. So then they ask, were you exempt as a teacher, trainee, or student? And this particular situation is no. But if you were present in 2018 as well, then basically you would be checking yes. And then they ask, you must provide sufficient facts on an attached statement to establish that you do not intend to reside permanently in the United States. This is basically pointing you towards the direction that you're still trying to claim non-resident status for filing your tax return. And basically, there are certain exceptions that you can argue for that apply to you. But if that's the situation, I would highly recommend that you speak to a certified public accountant to help you with understanding those tax laws. Otherwise, you would basically be considered a resident alien, and you would not need to complete Form 8843, and instead you would file as any U.S. citizen or permanent resident would file. Okay, and then finally, sign here only if you are filing this form by itself and not with your U.S. tax return. So again, this session is designed primarily for folks who do not have any U.S. source income and therefore do not have to file the 1040 NR. If that's the case, then you would need to sign this form. If you do have U.S. source income, then you do need to complete a Form 1040 NR along with this 8843, and you would file both forms together as your tax return. And if you're filing the 1040 NR, you have to sign that one, and you don't have to sign the 8843. But it doesn't hurt to sign it, so everyone can just sign this form. And then finally, well, basically, you're done with the form. But you still need to print it out. Well, having printed it out and signed it, you still need to mail it in to the IRS. So IRS does not allow electronic filing of this form. You do need to physically mail this, put it in an envelope, put a stamp with the right postage on, and send it to IRS. I would not recommend certified mail or anything like that, because it's just a lot of money and it's probably not needed. For purposes of record keeping, I would just suggest that you keep an electronic copy of this form that you created and signed, so that should IRS ever have any questions, you can say, well, here's the form that I completed and mailed to you. What IRS does with the probably I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of these forms they get. I don't know. I can't imagine that they pay that much attention to them. But again, this is just one of your tax filing obligations as a J1 or F1 here in this country. So you meet your obligation by completing this and mailing it off and keeping a record of it. And this is the address for mailing the form to. Okay, and here are just some additional resources here for the Form 8843, and the instructions. And then our website has a lot of basic information for tax filing, so please visit that tax website. And then also we have upcoming state tax workshop and federal tax workshop. So if you are going to be completing those forms, if you have some kind of income, then you may need to complete those forms, and I would encourage you to attend those sessions. Okay, now I will go to the chat and see what kind of questions we have and try to answer them all. Okay, non-residents don't have to fill the form 8843. No, that's not correct. Non-resident aliens for federal tax purposes, if they are in J or F status, must file the form 8843. Next question. I didn't have any income in the US in 2023, so do I need to send the 8843 to both federal and state IRS or only the federal? The form 8843 is a federal tax form. The federal tax agency is the IRS, and they only deal with federal taxes. The state tax agency is the California Franchise Tax Board. They do not have a form 8843. They don't care about the federal forms, the 8843 at all. And so they also source income differently. So just because you don't have to file a federal 1040 tax return, that doesn't mean that you don't have to file a state tax return. Completely different. So I again encourage folks to attend the state tax workshop. The due date to send this form, we recommend April 15th. Ultimately, if you don't have any 1040 NR that needs to be filed with this form, then the due date is actually June 15th. But it's just easier to remember. It's a simple form. It's easy to remember just to get everything done by April 15th. Another question. Is the form 8843 the same thing as the form 1098T? Absolutely not. So if you go to our website here, General Tax Filing Information Online, we have a lot of FAQs there, so you can get answers to your questions such as this. But the 1098T is just a document, a tax document that indicates the amount of money paid for tuition and perhaps scholarships. I'm not that familiar with it, but basically it's very different. It's issued by the institution, whereas the form 8843 is something that you personally complete based on your personal circumstances and submit to IRS. The 1098T is issued to you by your institution to which you paid tuition. And generally, the 1098T is used by students to get tax credits, benefits on their tax return, but that's only available to persons who are resident aliens for tax purposes, for federal tax purposes. Next question. If we renewed our passport after entering the US, should we include all passport numbers or just the current one? I would just indicate both, the one you entered on and the new one, and that way you're completely transparent, and they'd have both passport numbers if for some reason they need to reach out to immigration and look you up in the system. Next question, what's the difference between 1040 NR and the 1042S? Okay, the 1040 NR is your personal tax return that you file directly with the IRS. So it basically identifies, you are identifying all of the income that you earned, all of the tax that was withheld by your employer or that you submitted separately to the IRS, and you're identifying your overall tax liability, and then you're filing this return. So basically, you're kind of reconciling the previous year's payments, earnings, overall tax liability in your 1040 NR. The 1042-S is a form that your employer or your payer of money, of payments to you, issues you that identifies the amount of payments that they've distributed to you. And usually these payments they're identifying them on the 1042-S because they are based on treaty benefits, or there's some kind of non-wage payment, such as a fellowship. So the 1042-S is a form that your employer provides to you and, of course, to the IRS, whereas the 1040-NR is your tax return that you are completing and providing to the IRS. Next question, do we need to count days of presence spent in the US with a visa waiver? For purposes of the form 8843, no, you do not count any days of presence on the visa waiver program or as a B1 or B2 tourist or business person. Next question, I'm a J1 visiting scholar. Do I fill in part 2 and not part 1? Let me go back here. So part 1, everyone completes. Part 2 is what the scholar completes. Okay, next question. If I'm an F1 student with an on-campus job, do I need to fill out taxes, specifically the 8843 form? If you're an F1 student, you first need to identify whether you are a resident alien or a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes. If you are a non-resident alien, then you will need to fill out the 8843 form, and you will also need to fill out the 1040-NR because you earned income in the United States from a US source. So you would need to fill out that 1040-NR. However, if you are a resident alien, so if you've been an F1 student for more than 5 years, then you would actually not fill out the 8843 or the 1040-NR, and instead you would fill out the 1040 form. Next question. For the F1 students, what is the difference between 1042? Okay, I've already addressed that, 1042-S and 8843. Next question. I had a J1 visa, student non-degree, from 2015 to 2016, where I did not have to pay any tax. I didn't fill out any form either, to be honest. Do I need to count those days now that I have a J1 visa, research scholar, from 9/30 to 9/29/2024? Okay, so you're currently a scholar in J1 status. So as an exempt individual, you look back at the previous 6 years. So if your student program happened in the previous 6 years, you would need to count that. But you're indicating that your program was 2015 to 2016. So these have already fallen off your look back period. They're more than 6 years, so you do not need to count them. Next question. I'm a J1 scholar NRA receiving US income from UCSD since November of 2022. I'm a bit confused about whether this form exempts me from paying taxes, as I'm planning to stay in the US permanently. Again, Form 8843 is a form to indicate your exempt individual status. Exempt means exempt from counting days of presence. It does not mean exempt from paying taxes. It does not mean exempt from filing a tax return. So again, it's just whether or not you can exclude days of presence. If you actually received payments from a US source, you must file a tax return. It doesn't matter how much or how little you received, you must file a tax return. Even if you had a treaty benefit and you had no taxes taken out, you still must file a 1040-NR. And it doesn't matter whether you intend to stay here permanently or not. Each year, as an F or J individual, you are required to complete your tax returns, whatever is required for your particular situation. Next question. J2 visas only need to fill out the general information, right? No, the J2, so your dependents, F1 and F2 and J2 dependents would fill out the same parts as the F1 or J1 principal. So if it's a J2 dependent of a scholar, they would fill out the scholar section and they would put that same information, the academic institution and my name. Go ahead and put that, but it is identical, yes. Next question. My Glacier tax account shows W-2, 1042S, 1099, div, G, ent, etc. What are the differences between them? Okay, so here we're looking at names of forms. So I'll briefly go over what these forms are. The W-2 is the form that all of your employers will need to send you, that basically identifies the total amount of earnings for the tax year. It also identifies the total amount of withholding that that employer withheld from your paycheck for the tax year, for both federal income tax as well as state income tax. It will also have a sum of all the payroll taxes, your Social Security and Medicare tax, if that applies in your situation. So it's basically, it summarizes all that in one document, and they send it to you for purposes of you completing your 1040 NR form with IRS. They also send that same document to the IRS so that the IRS can cross-check and make sure that all the folks who receive W-2s are filing their tax returns. So that's the W-2, and that is for a federal form. There is also a similar, I'm sorry. Let me go on to the next one, the 1042S. Again, this is similar to the W-2, but it only reports income that is that is basically shielded from taxation due to tax treaty benefits, or if you have income that is not wages, such as a fellowship, that income will be reported on a 1042S if you're a non-resident alien for federal tax purposes. If you're a resident alien for federal tax purposes, the employer, UCSD, will not even report that on a 1042S or a W-2. The 1099 forms are basically a series of forms for agencies that make payments to you. So for instance, a 1099 int stands for interest. Some of you may have savings account for which you've earned interest, and you could get a 1099 INT recording the amount of interest you received from that particular bank. Some of you may actually be trading stocks on some kind of stock platform. If that's the case, then you will get a 1099 div for dividends, and that will record all of your earnings, your capital gains and dividend earnings for that stock trading platform. There's a 1099 miss for miscellaneous. That usually refers to independent contract work. For instance, J1 scholars have the option or the opportunity perhaps of giving a lecture at another institution for which they might get an $800 honorarium. If that's the case, that $800 is going to be reported on a 1099 miss. So the 1099 is basically additional kinds of documents that are similar to the W-2, except they're not issued by employers for whom you're working and receiving wages. They're issued by other agencies that are making various types of payments to you that are non-wage payments. Next question. Hi, I was previously a J1 student in 2021, 2022 with no US source income. I've now returned to the US as an F1 student, but I realized I never completed the form 8843 for my time in 2021, 2022. What should I do about this? You can go ahead onto the IRS website and do a search on prior year tax forms, and that will call up all their prior year tax forms, and you can actually you can search for form 8843, and since you're here in 2021 and 2022, you would click for both those years and fill out that form for two forms, one for each year, and then mail it in to that address. Better late than never. Next question. I didn't file 8843 last year. Can I file it for this year? Oh, so again, same thing what I just said. And what are the consequences of not filing? The consequences are basically you are telling the IRS that you are a non-resident alien. And in telling them that and identifying you're a non-resident alien, then they are only going to tax you on your US source income. And if you didn't have any US source income, then they're not going to tax you at all. If you don't tell them that you're a non-resident alien, then you're basically saying, oh, I'm not telling them I'm non-resident. I'm a resident. And if you're a resident alien, then the IRS will tax you on your worldwide income. So that doesn't matter where your income originated, you can be taxed on it as a resident alien. So filing the form 8843 is basically telling IRS, hey, I'm a non-resident alien, so you're only allowed to tax me on my US source income if I have any. So that's basically the consequences. Next question. I came in US in 2022 and I'm still a non-resident alien, but box 2 and W2 form is showing $165 of federal income tax withheld. Do I need to file a tax return for that? Okay, if you're a non-resident alien and you had US source income, you have to file a federal income tax return. Doesn't matter how much or how little, you are required to file a return. For this particular individual, if you had $165 of income tax withheld, there's a chance that you could get a refund. You know, if you have a treaty benefit that covers it all, you could get all of that refunded. If so anyway, you have to file, and likely you might be able to get a refund of some or all of that. Next question. As a non-resident alien on J1 visa, do I need to fill out 1042 NR and 8843? Okay, so as a non-resident, as a postdoc on J1, you have to file the 1040 NR and the 8843. And of course, as non-resident aliens, all of you who are affiliated with UC San Diego are eligible to use GTP to complete your tax return, Glacier Tax Prep. Any of you who received payments should have also received an automatic email in early February. I forget what date, maybe the February 8th or so, that basically describes or gives you instructions for accessing Glacier Tax Prep to complete your 1040 NR. And then for state tax, I would highly encourage you to come to the state tax workshop. It's held on Zoom, and it's toward the end of March, I think the third week of March. And basically, you file the California 540 NR or 540, depending upon your residency status, and the Schedule 22. Those are the state forms. Okay, next question. If someone entered the US on a J2 visa, spent some days as a J2, then joined a postdoc position at UCSD after changing to J1, all in 2023, how do they file Form 8843 and 1040 NR? So basically, if you came on a J2, I don't know when So if you go back to part one, where you are supposed to indicate your status, basically you indicate when you arrived in J2 status, and then this person changed to J1 status. So in the next question, it asks your current non-immigrant status, so you would put J1, and you would put the date that you changed status. Now, if that change of status happened by departure and then re-entry to the country, you could just indicate that you're J1, you re-entered U.S. re-entry on such and such a date. And you could also say the date that you exited in your J2 status. And then you would use GTP to complete your form 1040 NR and the 8843 along with it. Next question. I had a J1 visa. My DS 2019 start date is January of 2024, and I entered the United States in 2023. I only stayed in the US for 20 days in December 2023. Can I still benefit from the whole tax treaty years? Okay, so this is asking a couple points to make on this. So if you entered in 2023, but you didn't start working till January 2024, you would not have made any US source income, I'm assuming, in 2023. However, you were present in J status, so therefore you still are required to file the form 8843, but that is all because you had no US source income. Next year, you would, or in 2025, when completing your 2024 tax return, you would file both the 8843 and the 1040 NR. Now, the tax treaty question is different. Tax treaty benefits usually give you a full 2-year period from the date you arrived. So if this person arrives on December 20th of 2023, then they should be able to continue taking their treaty benefit. I'm thinking this person is from China. So if that's the case and they're eligible for the China tax treaty benefit, they will get it for 3 years until December 19th of 2026. Okay, next question. I entered the US in 2023 as a J1. My wife entered as a J2 in 2024. Okay, does she need to fill out the form 8843? No, because she was not present at all in 2023. Next question, do I need to file 8843 next year when I'm back in my home country again? Yes. For persons whose programs might be ending sometime this year, if you're here in J status as a non-resident alien, when you go back to your home country sometime this year, in 2025, you still are technically required to file a form 8843 and potentially a 1040 NR if you had any US source income. And of course, a California state tax return if you had any income period. So yes, you still must meet those tax filing obligations. What can they do to you? They're not going to come after you in your home country, but if you do want to return to the US, it would behoove you to meet all of our legal requirements, which includes filing your tax returns. Next question. If I've not received any US income, do I only need to file 8843? That is correct. If you have no US source income, then for your federal tax filing obligations, you only need to file the form 8843. If you have other income, you may need to file a California tax return because California sources income based on where you do the work. So for instance, if you're a scholar and your home employer is paying your salary while you're doing work for them here, then that actually is California source income, and California will tax you on that income. where can we get information about the Form 1040-NR? You can go to our website that I pointed out earlier. Let me get back to that page. Oops. Sorry, too far. Anyway, at the resources page at the end, I recommend you come to or review that website. And then, of course, our federal tax. Anyway, sorry. You'll get this presentation, and the hyperlink will be there. Next question. I was living in the U.S. in 2023 as a J1 and received payments from UCSD. However, in December, my wife and 2 kids joined me. Can I ask for a tax refund based on the fact that I was no longer a single person for tax purposes and had dependents? So this is one of the big differences between residents and non-resident aliens for federal tax purposes. Resident aliens can partake in all of the benefits, tax credits, etc., that U.S. citizens and permanent residents can get. Non-residents do not have that same ability. So as a non-resident, you can't get benefits for having dependents with you. And you can learn more about this at the Federal Tax Workshop coming up in a couple weeks in March. Okay, I came to the US in September 2023 on F1, and I do not have any income in the US. Do I need to file anything? Yes, you would need to file the 8843. Okay, I'm looking to see, make sure I made all the questions. Okay, it looks like all the questions. I have one individual who direct messaged me about questions regarding a 1042S. So I would ask that individual to email your question to internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu, and I will respond to it. And generally, if any of you have questions, that is the email account to inquire regarding your questions. I'll say it again, it's all one word, internationaltaxhelp@ucsd.edu. So the individual who direct messaged me, please send me an email, and then I'll respond to your email today. Okay. Looks like there may be one more. Yeah, thank you, Mayeli, for putting that in the chat. Okay, thank you all for attending the workshop, and please do look at attending the upcoming federal and state tax workshops. There are a lot of really good information by tax experts. We have someone on the faculty at San Diego State in their accounting program who will be presenting on the federal tax workshop, and then we have individuals from the Franchise Tax Board presenting on the state tax workshop. Okay, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.